Oh, hi, hello there. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, Liv, here with all of Heracles' boyfriends. And man, were there a lot of them. That's right, today's episode is the last of my Pride specials for this year, and I am scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to queer stories from Greek myth because I just cannot help myself. But honestly, I'm really nearing the end of them. I mean, thank the gods, there are still some I told in the olden days of the podcast that deserve fresh retellings for next year. Or in this case, for this year, because it includes at least one of Heracles' many boyfriends. But we'll get there. I've just gotten back from a trip to Greece, and this is the first episode I'm working on since getting back. And, well, I don't entirely know why I'm sharing that, but I guess it explains if the past episodes seem to lack anything timely in them. Like, shit's wild in the world, so who the fuck knows what's been going on. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the past few episodes. I really loved getting to tell those two trans stories again last week. They're both lovely and interesting and seriously important. It's absolutely vital that we remember that being trans is not new. Being born into the wrong sex isn't new. It's existed for fucking ever. People have always wanted to transition, have known they're a different gender from their biological sex, and if the deeply problematic ancient Greeks could understand this and tell stories about it, giving transformations to the people that needed them, making it a divine occurrence that someone is given the body that they know is meant to be theirs, then the goddamn modern world can wrap their heads around it too. Fuck. Anyway, trans rights are human rights, and if you're not loud in your support of trans people and everything they're facing, you're doing life wrong. But today is about Heracles and all of the men that he loved. So let's get to that, shall we? This is episode 217. That guy really got around. Heracles and his many, many boyfriends. If Heracles is anything, it's a slut. Okay, I mean, maybe that's harsh, I'm not slut-shaming, but it seems like a good opener, you know? There's nothing wrong with being a slut. Heracles can do it, so can you. Let's take back the word, it's a fun one. The point is that during his many, many mythological stories, Heracles had sex with absolutely countless people. Just hundreds, for real, hundreds. Many women, many men. The dude just got around. And there's a reason for that, and it wasn't an addiction to sex, though let's not blame him for his desires, you know? The reason why Heracles slept with everyone and their mother is because, well, he's Heracles. Unlike the other major Greek heroes, Heracles spanned the entirety of the Greek world. He was regional, sure, he had ties to Thebes and the Peloponnese, but unlike heroes like Theseus and Cadmus, even Perseus, Heracles was the hero for all of Greece. It's why he's so famous and why there are so many stories tied to him. Because in order to be on the ancient Greek map, so to speak, you had to have some kind of tie to Heracles. And often the easiest way to do that was through him having had sex with someone from your town or your region. Thus, we get these hundreds of stories of Heracles having sex with people all around the Greek world. But today is about some very specific people that were varying degrees of special in Heracles' life, have varying degrees of information associated with them. We are talking about his boyfriends, because yeah, he had a lot of them. A lot. Some are more famous than others, for their relationship with the Greek hero, at least. People like Hylas, who, at the time of this writing, is the only name that my Twitter followers could suggest to me. Come on, guys, I was wanting help. Others, though, might surprise you, because again, Heracles got around in the most satisfying of ways. Like so many stories of Heracles, many of the men he loved are just footnotes, mentions from varying degrees of relevant sources in the greater life of Heracles, and some are much more detailed in their stories, or much more important in broader mythology. I'm going to tell you about them all as best I can, because frankly, finding any kind of definitive list and then tracking down the ancient sources that reference them has been a menace. Like, some list had Heracles as a lover of Eurystheus, and given Eurystheus devoted his entire life to making Heracles miserable with those 12 labors, like, I just don't think that they were also fucking on the side, but apparently Google does. Anyway, I digress. My point is that the men Heracles did and did not love, did and did not fuck, is weirdly baffling. My point is that the list of men that Heracles did and did not love, did and did not fuck, is weirdly baffling and slightly contentious, but we're going to do our best to cover them all. And we'll start with the most beautiful man ever to live. Sexy, sexy Adonis, the man famous for being so beautiful that Aphrodite and Persephone fought over who would get to be with him. He was also said to have been a lover of Heracles. As usual, the sourcing is minimal, but we know it was a tradition, at least in some cases, that they were lovers. As if Heracles didn't have enough boyfriends in his lifetime, he also got to spend time with the most beautiful man ever to live? What a life, truly. Unfortunately, in loving Adonis, Heracles got himself tied up in the world of Aphrodite. Never a good idea. Adonis was one of only 2 mortals ever loved by the goddess of love and beauty. He was an anomaly, and when she found out that he had also loved and been loved by the most famous hero of all time, well, unsurprisingly, Aphrodite got jealous. According to one late source, Aphrodite taught the centaur Nessos how to ensnare Heracles in punishment for ever being with Adonis. You might remember how that went down from my episode on Heracles and the centaur Nessus, and how he met one of his wives, Deianira. Let's just say that it isn't immediate, but Heracles' dealing with Nessos is ultimately what causes his death. And speaking of beautiful men, Nereus was a king of Simi, an island I visited for the first time just last month. How cute. Anyway, Nereus was super fucking gorgeous. Some authors refer to him as the second most beautiful of all the Greeks to sail to Troy, second only to Achilles, so you know that he was hot shit. Anyway, we have literally no information about their relationship except to say that apparently Nereus was loved by Heracles. Or someone else says that maybe he was actually Heracles' son. Love to have that kind of confusion in the sources. Totally normal stuff. We're going to go with them being lovers, though, because Heracles is clearly into super beautiful dudes, and who are we to deny him that? And then there's a man named Abderus, who was, according to some, a son of Hermes and a nymph named Thronia. He was a squire or a groom to Heracles, a young man helping him with his labors, at least with the labor that entailed the man-eating mares of Diomedes, where this poor young man, Abderus, was killed by those mares, torn apart. So I suppose their romance was short-lived. Heracles buried him near the spring of his nymph mother and founded a town there that he called Abdera. And well, that's most of what we know about him, other than Heracles also loved him. And sometimes Abderus is killed by Theseus, because of course he is. And sometimes, or at least according to one 9th century CE Byzantine writer, he was the brother of our boy Patroclus? Anyway, he's a mystery, but what's certain is that he was loved by Heracles, at least for a time. And one of the most thrilling references to lovers of Heracles is none other than Nestor himself. Now, is this found in a vague and very late reference? Yes. And do I complain later in the episode about exactly this type of sourcing that really isn't indicative of how things were seen in the ancient Greek time period that I concern myself with? Sure. But it's Nestor and Heracles. together. It's too fun to criticize the source. You see, according to Philostratus, a 3rd century CE writer, Heracles once fell for none other than the famous king of Pylos, Nestor. You all remember Nestor as the one of sound mind during the events of the Iliad. He's that nice old man who's seen too many things. He's arguably the most likable character on the Greek side. He's the one who tells the story about Caeneus, the trans character that we covered last year. We love Nestor. And well, it seems that when he met Heracles, they had a bit of a connection. Philostratus says that when Heracles met Nestor, he found him to be quite appealing, handsome even, and that he cherished him more than so many of his other past lovers, specifically because unlike the other men that Heracles tended to be with, Nestor wasn't young and innocent. He wasn't untested. No. Nestor had seen things, he was mature, and few did Heracles like that about him. Honestly, huge respect to Heracles for this one. I mean, Nestor was almost certainly the silver fox of the ancient Greek heroes. Nestor are arguably the real best of the Greeks. All right, I'm throwing something in here because I was absolutely, I was not intending for this, but it came up after writing the script, and it seems incredibly relevant to today's episode. I recently got a review. It was 4 stars, so I'm not complaining, but all it says is, some podcasts are good, but some have sexual stories and sexy stories making not that good. Anyway, these are sexy stories, so if you don't like my sexy mythological stories, I guess you are shit out of luck. Corythus was a nice man that was said to be a lover of Heracles. I'm just assuming he was nice, actually, because literally all we know is that he was an Iberian man who was loved by Heracles, and apparently he also made the first helmet. So, that was nice for him. And then, of course, there's Iolaus, who was famous for being Heracles' charioteer and for helping him vitally in his slaying of the Lernaean Hydra. Without Iolaus on that one, Heracles would have been well and truly fucked, and Iolaus was also most well known as Heracles' nephew, but according to Plutarch at least, they were also lovers. Whether that version has him as the nephew and the lover of Heracles isn't entirely clear. We're going to go with the idea that if and when they're seen as lovers, they're also not, uncle and nephew. But then this is Greek mythology, so anything goes. According to a 3rd century poet named Alcaius, Heracles loved a fellow by the name of Polystratus, who was likely also called by the name Sostratus, and when that man died, Heracles was so distraught that he cut his hair in grief, something typically done by women in their grief. Heracles was nothing if not devoted, even if he had quite the volume of men to be devoted to. All the same, that still lines up with everything there is about Heracles. As much as everyone all across Greece wanted him to be part of their local mythos, more often than not they gave him a lover, man or woman, from their region too. It results in a man that seems to have gotten around pretty prolifically, but also loved equally deeply. A very late source, who I will mention again later, has this wild-ass line to share about another lover of Heracles. Quote, Stichios, the Aetolian, who was beloved by Heracles, was opened and found to have a hairy heart. He had been killed by Heracles himself when, in his madness, he killed his own children, and it is said that he was the only one the hero lamented. Yeah, you heard me. According to this random dude, Photius, from the 8th century CE, Heracles loved a guy named Stichios, who had a hairy heart? Sorry, what exactly? And then I guess Heracles killed him accidentally at the same time that he killed his wife Megara and their 2 children. But according to this weirdo source, Heracles only felt bad about killing this Stichios man. Absolutely wild-ass nonsense that definitely isn't found in any Greek sources from the ancient Greek world. But gods, was it funny, and funny enough that it had to be shared with you all today. And speaking of obscure and weird sources, a scholiast on Apollodorus, i.e. like someone from the vaguely ancient world breaking down an ancient work, says that Heracles had many other lovers, including Philoctetes, Pirithous, and no, I'm not sure if that's meant to be Theseus's Pirithous. It's possible. A man named Diomos, and another named Phrix. So, you know, those are more possible lovers, I suppose, though I can't find any references to anything more. And then, most importantly, and told in the most detail, we have none other than Heracles' beloved Hylas. The story of Hylas and Heracles comes mostly from Apollodorus' Argonautica, the story of Jason and the Argonauts and their quest for the Golden Fleece. Both Heracles and Hylas were part of the Argonauts, though I think it's safe to say that Hylas was there just because Heracles was there. And then, along the journey, they stopped in Mysia, where it all went wrong. They stopped and prepared to have a feast. They were having a nice break from their journey, the Mysians had welcomed them, and Hylas was tasked with gathering water. So off he went to the local stream, with amphorae in hand, maybe. It's just that, well, it seemed to be that at the exact moment that Hylas went off in search of water, at this stream there was a party of nymphs taking place. They were having the time of their lives, but when one of them was affected by Aphrodite and her amorous, godly gifts, she decided that she just was going to take what she wanted, regardless of how Hylas felt about it. The nymph grabbed Hylas, forced him to kiss her, and then forcibly dragged him into the water and beneath the surface. Only one of the Argonauts, a man named Polyphemus, no relation to the Cyclops, heard Hylas' scream as the nymph pulled him into the water. But by then it was too late. Hylas never resurfaced from the water. Polyphemus rushed towards the sound of the scream, just frantically searching for Hylas, but he had no idea what had happened. There was no trace of him. When he found nothing, no matter how hard he looked, he was forced to assume that the young man was carried off by some wild beasts, and so he determined to do what he could to search for wherever they could have taken him. But in his search, he quickly came upon none other than Heracles, and, well, he was forced to tell Hylas' lover what had happened, how he'd heard the man scream and then couldn't find him anywhere. Heracles cried out in anguish. He screamed in sadness at the news that Hylas was not only missing, but that he had screamed, and now he was nowhere to be found. It wasn't hard to assume the worst. And then he went full Heracles. His fear turned to anger, and he pulled trees from their roots. He ran around in fury, raging like he had just lost his wits. He ran off, searching, crying out, yelling, and while the rest of the Argonauts could hear him in his anguish, just every now and then, he didn't return, and they were forced to leave without him. There's another source for the love of Heracles and Hylas. The poet Theocritus, who seems to have been from a very similar time period to Apollonius and his Argonautica in the Hellenistic period. He wrote a poem about the two, Heracles and Hylas, and how they loved each other. It's now just called Idyll XIII, and if you haven't already guessed, I'm just going to read it to you now. From what god soever sprung Nicias, love was not, as we seemed to think, born for us alone, nor first unto us of mortal flesh that cannot see the morrow look things of beauty beautiful. For Amphitrion's brazen-hearted son that braved the roaring lion, he too once loved a lad, to wit the beauteous Hylas of the curly locks. And even as father, his son, had taught him all the lore that made him a good man, and brought him fame, and would never leave him, neither if day had risen to the noon, nor when dawn's white steeds first galloped into the home of Zeus, nor yet when the twittering chickens went scurrying at the flapping of their mother's wings to their bed upon the smoky hen roost. This did he that he might have the lad fashioned to his mind, and that pulling a straight furrow from the outset, the same might come to be a true man. Now, when Jason, son of Aeson, was to go fetch the golden fleece with his following of champions that were chosen of the best of all of the cities in the land, then came there with them to the rich Iolcus, the great man of toil, who was the son of the high-born Alcmene of Medea, and went down with Hylas at his side to that good ship Argo, even to her that speeding ungrazed clean through the blue clappers ran into Phasis Bay as an eagle into the great gulf, whereafter those clappers have stood still, reefs evermore. And at the rising of the Pleiades, what time of the waning spring the young lambs find pasture in the uplands, then it was that the divine flower of hero folk was minded of its voyage, and taking seat in the Argo's hull, came after 2 days, blowing in the south wind to the Hellespont, and made haven within Propontis, at the spot where furrow is broadened and share brightened by the oxen of the Chianians. Being gone forth upon the strand, as for their supper lay, were making it ready, thwart by thwart, but one couch was strown them for all. For they found to their hand a meadow that furnished good store of litter, and thence did cut them taper rushes and tall bed straw. Meanwhile the golden-haired Hylas was gone to bring water against supper for his own Heracles and the valiant Telamon, for they two did ever eat together at a common board, bone, with a brazen ewer. Ere long he espied a spring, in a hollow it lay, whereabouts there grew many herbs, as well as blue swallowwort and fresh green maidenhair, as blooming parsley and tangled deer grass. Now in the midst of the water there was a dance of the nymphs afoot, of those nymphs who, like the water, take no rest, those nymphs who are the dread goddesses of the country folk. Unica, to wit, and Malice, and Nakia, with the springtime eyes. And there, when the lad put forth the capacious pitcher in haste to dip it in, lo, with one accord they all clung fast to his arm, because love of the young Argive had fluttered all their render breast, and down he sank into the black water headlong, as when a falling star will sink headlong into the main, and the mariner cry to his shipmates, "Hoist away, my lads, the breeze freshens." Then took the nymphs the weeping lad upon their knees and offered him comfort of gentle speech. Meanwhile the son of Amphitryon was grown troubled for the child, and gone forth with that bow of his that was bent Scythian-wise, and the cudgel that was ever in the grasp of his right hand. Thrice cried he on that Hylas, as loud as his deep throttle could belch sound, thrice likewise did the child make answer, albeit his voice came thin from the water, and he that was hard by seemed very far away. When a fawn cries in the hills, some ravening lion will speed from his lair to get him a meal so ready, and even so went Heracles wildly to and fro amid the pathless brake, and covered much country because of his longing for the child. As lovers know no flinching, so endless was the toil of his wandering by wood and wold, and all Jason's business was but a by-end, and all the while the ship stood tackle aloft, and so far as might be laden, and the heroes passed the night a clearing of the channel, waiting upon Heracles, but he, alas, was running whithersoever his feet might carry him in a frenzy. The god did rend so cruelly the heart within him. Thus came fairest Hylas to be numbered of the blessed, and the heroes to gird at Heracles for a deserter, because he wandered and left the good ship of 30 thwarts. Nevertheless, he made the inhospitable land of the Colchians afoot. I'm sorry for old translations, but it's just lovely. And now that we've come to, mostly, the end of Heracles' lovers, I have a story to tell you about today's episode. You see, I wanted to do something a little like this. So I thought, let's do a cursory Google and make sure that Heracles has enough male lovers for me to make an episode about it. Just some names will do, I thought. Even if a few of them aren't actually in the sourcing much. Still, it'll be fine, provided there was enough. This was how I thought. A quick Google said, gods, there are so many. Sure, some of them will be names that are typically not known to be lovers of his, but surely if they're listed on so many websites, there must be some passing reference in an ancient source that I can share with you. How naive I was. You see, let me introduce you to a website that appears to just be called Gay News. Thank you, Gay News. You have a great name, but you have caused me so much grief. You see, they list 10 men that Heracles was said to be lovers with. And then other websites also picked up those names. Many websites, actually. All devoted to LGBTQ stories and history from the ancient world. And all the power to them. That's awesome. Except many of the names are not lovers of Heracles, nor am I convinced that all of them are even actual characters from myth. And the ones that are typically based in incredibly late and basically irrelevant sources. Basically, they seem to have chosen names that, if they are named at all, it's once in just that very, very late work that I mentioned earlier, Photius, who was writing in the 9th century CE, which is the Byzantine period, and pretty late even in that. It's 1,500 years after most of the stories of Heracles have already been told. Basically, I'm saying there are much better and more accurate lovers of Heracles to talk about, and this website led me to scour the depths of the ancient sources that I never would have even imagined that I'd have to scour just to figure out what on Gaia's earth they were talking about. So anyway, while Google might tell you that Heracles' most famous lovers are Admetus, Iphitos, Euphemus, Erotikos, Jason, Stichios, and Phryx, well, the ancient sourcing does beg to differ. Or rather, everyone prior to the 9th century would much rather talk about his more interesting male lovers, like Adonis and Hylas, and meanwhile, Jason? Really? Jason? As a lover of Heracles? They weren't even particularly close friends. He was on the Argo with Jason, but gods, he was more concerned with his lover Hylas than that dirty dish rag personified that is Jason. Ephemos was on the Argo too, so that's something, but again, Heracles was pretty fucking distracted, and I think we'd know if he really loved anyone else on board, because he made a seriously big deal about Hylas. And Admetus. Again, there's one passing reference that maybe he loved Admetus, but given Admetus was all about his wife and Heracles saved his wife, I feel like that was platonic. They were pals. And then there's Erotikos, who I can't for the life of me find that name anywhere, even in these obscure sources. And well, I guess that's my rant against Google, because even though I'm obsessed now with always, and I mean always, having primary ancient sources to share with you when I talk about characters and stories, I can still sometimes get caught in Google's deceptive web. Because there are lots of lovers of Heracles that are confirmed in the ancient world and are much more interesting than these bizarrely late and passing sources. Also, can I just say that Google says Hera is Heracles' mother. And that's how we know we don't love Google all the time. I also wrote much of this rant before I was able to track down that vague passing reference. But I'm keeping it all in because this episode and this last bit of rambling I've done is a great behind-the-scenes look at what so many episodes look like as they come together. Nothing is certain, sources contradict each other, and you have to read between the lines, and even then, sometimes it is hard to decide what anyone really meant. I usually try to hide those bits, at least as much as I can, while being accurate, but today's was just silly. So there you go, I guess. Heracles was just too popular. Too many people wanted to link him up with too many other dudes. In the end, fortunately, we have Heracles' explicit and confirmed list of lovers like Abderus, Nestor, Adonis, Corythus, Hylas, Iolaus, Polystratus, and Nereus. Because Google, lying to me aside, Heracles still got around in the best possible way. He had male and female lovers all over the place. He was just always looking to spill his Heraclean love all over the ancient Greek world. Good for him. Get yours, Heracles. Oh, nerds, thank you all so much for listening. What was this episode? It was so fun. I feel like I'm coming back after such a long break. I mean, because in my own head I am. But I realize you all just heard me last week. So I won't go on about it, but it feels weird. Anyway, thank you all for being here, for listening. Next month is the 6-year anniversary of this show. And honestly, it continues to blow my mind how much you all want to know about myth, how nerdy and niche you all want to get, and fuck if it all isn't the greatest thing to ever happen to me. So, thank you. And as always, let's end on a 5-star review from one of you lovely listeners, because truly, these make my day. I was reading them all while I was away and taking note of what I can read in upcoming episodes. This one, short and to the point. It's from someone called Hens Chanson, and then just a bunch of gibberish letters, in the States. New to podcasts. Just recently got into podcasts, and this was the first one I started. Currently binging it from the start and already so invested. Love to hear that, and welcome to podcasts. They're the best. Also remember that for all they were also problematic as hell and had lots of their own unique forms of bigotry, the ancient Greeks were pretty fucking cool with men loving other men. Women? That's questionable. But dudes! Gods, they loved dudes who loved other dudes. And as we learned last week, they also believed in, and to an extent, recognized the lived existences of trans people. Remember that. And maybe use it as ammo every time you encounter some gender-critical piece of garbage. Okay? None of this is new. Trans rights are human rights. Protect trans kids. Defend trans lives. If the ancient Greeks can do it, so can we. Let's Talk About Myths, baby, is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians and handles so many podcast-related things, from running the YouTube to creating promotional images and videos to editing and research. Plus, gods, she keeps me on track. Honestly, with my ADHD, couldn't do without her at this point. Stephanie Foley works to transcribe the podcast for YouTube captions and accessibility. The podcast is hosted and monetized by iHeartMedia. Help me continue bringing you the world of Greek mythology and the ancient Mediterranean by becoming a patron, where you'll get bonus episodes and more. Visit patreon.com/mythsbaby or click the link in this episode's description. Thank you, nerds. You're seriously fucking cool. I am Liv, and I love this shit.